Dzień dobry. I was thinking of starting, right? Hello, everyone. I think we are starting already, right? I see you nodding. It's the last panel of the conference. How is everyone feeling? Not everyone came from the coffee break, I think. Have you enjoyed the conference? How have you been enjoying the conference, I would ask first. Silence. I hope. Yeah, cool. Thank you for your signs. Well, dear friends, it's an honor to be here and moderate this distinguished panel on a topic that is profoundly important to me and many of you here in the room, which is freedom and remembrance. My name is Hanna Lubakova. I am a Belarusian journalist, and as a journalist from Belarus, I have witnessed firsthand the complex interplay between freedom, resistance, and dictatorship. The concept of freedom is not monolithic. It varies across different cultures and historical contexts. It's around 800 kilometers from Warsaw to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, the country that has been bravely fighting against Russian invasion. Russia's attack on Ukraine has not only challenged the sovereignty of an independent nation, but also reignited a global discourse on the value of freedom and democracy. It's 550 kilometers from Warsaw to Minsk, where I'm coming from, the capital of Belarus, where the press freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression are practically non-existent at the moment. It's 550 kilometers, but it feels like decades away. Today we will explore how the memory of freedom evolves, how it is valued and understood, how to promote a deeper appreciation of freedom, and how to transmit the lessons of freedom to future generations. We will consider these questions with our distinguished panelists. Martin Andreller, Estonian Institute of Historical Memory, Tallinn. Łukasz Kamiński, National Ossoliński Institute and the University of Wrocław, Miłosz Rzeźnik, German Historical Institute, Warsaw, and Laura Kolbe, University of Helsinki, Finland. First, I will ask our distinguished panelists to set out the stage with their brief remarks about their experience, about what they heard at the conference, whatever they want to say at this stage, and then we will proceed with the discussion. I'll start with Łukasz Kamiński.
Thank you very much. So, if I may start with a proposal of introducing a division between two terms, and I think also in your introduction, we see a difference, especially in the context of memorialization, between remembering the freedom and remembering the freedom fight. And from my personal experience, my also perspective as researcher, this distinction is quite important. So maybe to introduce some context, so Polish context of our debate, I would like to share a few thoughts about evolution of remembrance in those two aspects. So when speaking about the former, remembering the freedom, Polish and not only Polish, generally East Central European experience is a little bit different because there is not so much freedom to remember in our history. But just two examples. First, the history of remembrance of Polish Second Republic, so pre-war time. And due to communist propaganda, which heavily attacked in all contexts the remembrance of the Second Republic, in 1980s or after 1989, we remember the Second Republic as just something which is in stark contrast to the time of communist dictatorship, so a time of freedom. And of course, in the sense of country's independence, it's still valid, but in the sense of especially political freedoms, the history is much more complicated, especially after 1926 coup d'etat. And I think now, also thanks to research on time of communist dictatorship, we remember much more also this aspect of the history of Second Republic. And the second example is a history of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was even under communists remembered as a very specific country of freedoms, political freedoms. And last years, this concept, which is still very popular and common in every textbook, was challenged by the new interpretations of history, so-called popular or people's history of Poland. And authors stress, of course, obvious for historian fact that those freedoms were limited only to one social group, so the nobility. And I think it's, for example, a huge challenge for this museum, Polish History Museum, because in between the preparation of scenario of permanent exhibition, which was a few years ago, and opening of permanent exhibition, a lot has changed in this context. So some visitors, probably quite big groups of them, will interpret this part of exhibition in different way, comparing to intention of authors. Yes, and then there will be a question: is it really history of freedom? Maybe there is also a history of lack of freedom for many people in Poland. And the second part, so the history of freedom fight. Polish situation is somehow specific because the shift in remembrance started earlier than in other countries because of the power of solidarity movement, because solidarity was powerful enough not only to challenge authorities in the political sense, but also they offered new vision of Polish history, especially contemporary history, new way to remember Polish history, especially in this context of freedom fight. So, and solidarity had the tools to implement it. Underground publications mainly, but also exhibitions organized in churches, lectures, so-called flying universities, so educational illegal activities. So already in 1989, our remembrance was different that communists wanted it to be. And the three most important topics were communist and Soviet repressions, which are of course connected with the freedom fight because they were repressing mainly the freedom fighters. Secondly, mass revolts under communism, but also non-communist resistance during the Second World War, history of Home Army. For example, after 1989, probably in a natural way, the focus was a little bit changed, and we were in this context of freedom fight, we started to focus mainly on the history of solidarity itself, yes, and many ways of memorialization with monuments, later on also museums, etc., and the history of democratic opposition of 1970s. The third change appeared in 2004 with creation of Warsaw Uprising Museum, which reminded us about importance of the Warsaw Uprising, but also because it was and still is, after 20 years, visited by not less as 500,000 people yearly, and especially almost every school class is visiting this museum. So it became a central form, this history of freedom fight under the German occupation. And the last thing I would like to mention is remembrance of so-called cursed soldiers, so Polish underground, anti-communist underground after the war, which in the last decade again dominated our way to remember. And of course we have a lot of debates about this. And I think now, after 35 years of freedom, we are seeking for a kind of balance, how to remember freedom and how to remember the freedom fight, but it's still ongoing process. And this place, I am pretty sure, will play a really crucial role in this process.
Thank you so much, great timing. Don't put away your mic, please. Just a really quick follow-up. So I'm not a historian, I'm going to ask naive questions and encourage you to do the same when we will have a discussion. So quick question. So you mentioned these changes throughout the years, and I understand that, of course, there were kind of new events that were discovered or that appeared, and of course, you kind of, in a way, how to say that? Gosh, my English is. And of course, you had to kind of show them, and you have to explore them, and you have to explain this to the generation. But you mentioned something that is it history of freedom or lack of freedom? So can you a little bit elaborate on that and quickly explain this to us? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, because it's our historical experience, yes, that in last quarter of century, as Poland, for example, we experienced mainly various forms of enslavement, occupation, division of the country. So remembrance of this part of our history is also very, very, very important. So we remember the victims, we remember the repression, and less we remember, for example, I don't know, which is important for many other countries, our democratic tradition, for example. Yes, of course, even in the freedom fight, we find a lot of elements of freedom. Yes, for example, there's an important way how to remember Polish underground during the Second World War or under communism, especially Solidarity movement, as a civic movement. So the movement to protect the rights, yes, and freedom. So it was what I meant by this distinction.
And also probably because for some generations it's more important to speak about freedom, and for some it's important to remember that there was always freedom, right? So this is, I guess, the explanation to me as well. Let us stay with this region. Miłosz, I'd like to ask you to give us some brief introductory remarks, and then we will proceed with the...
Yes, thank you. And actually, I will continue your considerations, because starting from another perspective. And you know, I've been socialized in Czech school educational system. I went to school in the 1970s, and what I learned in the school in history was the impression of the Czech people and Czech history filled with the fight for freedom. A national historical narration is formed in the 19th century, principally, and so we had the imagination, the old Czechs as old Slavs were fighting against the German expansion, against the feudalism, the Hussites against the religious oppression, the Czech people against the foreign nobility, the Czech people in the 19th century against the oppression of Austrian monarchy, and so on and so on. And I had actually the impression that the fight for freedom is the sense of the Czech history. And at some moment later, years later, I understood that that's quite a normal case in European history, in European countries, and not only in the national context, as part of the national historical narratives, but as part of historical cultures, historical narratives as such. And what was very, very interesting for me was to observe. So firstly, the freedom in the Czech history has been understood collectively. It's collective freedom of Czech people, not at the first place, only on the second or third place as the freedom of people as such, of individuals. Second, that was quite normal, not only in the national context, but also in other political contexts. And looking at the historical narratives during the communist period in our countries, you had the same in there. So freedom as the sense of history, but freedom of who? Freedom of what social groups? Freedom of what? In the very middle of this view, of this perspective, was the fight of working classes against the oppression, and so on and so on. And that show us that freedom is a value depending on something, on ideology, on political circumstances, on historical period, on the question of, we are speaking of freedom of nations, of countries, of social groups, of individuals, and so on and so on. So freedom seems to be a general value which is usable in every context, political context in Europe, even in dictatorships, even in oppressional regimes, and that shows us that freedom is a category that is to be historicized and contextualized. That's the first point. Everyone is using freedom. Even North Korean propaganda is using freedom of people. Even communist regimes use that in China and so. Who is speaking of freedom with which understanding? The second one is the intergenerational context. We have the problem or the challenge nowadays, because we still in West European countries or Western cultures still are discussing about the equilibrium, because balance between individual equality and freedom and collective freedom means independence, automatically freedom, and freedom of people. And we can observe that the regime of thinking about historical times, about historical time, is changing between generations. So our ability to think, to historicize history size is different topics, aspects, problems is changing, and of course, personal experience of both of us, or of the three of us, is to observe the young generation. So we are the typical aging generation, socialized for my, so the experience of generation formation of my group was 1989 in Europe. Freedom after communist regime, freedom of different levels, economic, individual, political, and so on. And for us, it still is a central value, and which is normal, historically is normal, but we can observe that the young people, our sons and daughters, that for them it's something obvious, something which is natural. So we have the impression that they don't see the very value of freedom, and we are angry about it, and so. And I can remember the time as I was a teenager. That was the same with my grandfather. For him, the most important thing was not freedom but peace, because he experienced the Second World War and the occupation and all the time. And for me, that was normal. That was natural. Freedom, peace is natural, and he could not understand how it is possible that for young people it's something natural which must not. I'm speaking too long. You understand what I wanted to say, and yes.
We will talk about these
intergenerational aspects. Yes.
Yes, we will talk about them later and how they perceive freedom. Or maybe there is another word. You mentioned peace, then you mentioned freedom. Maybe for them it's another word. Maybe it's the, movement, or something else. We can discuss it. But may I ask you, as a quick follow-up, another naive question. So you mentioned that there was some change for you, right? That you perceived fight for freedom in one way, and then something changed. What were the factors that influenced this change for you?
That was the experience. So if you are, say, 18, in late socialist regime in Czechoslovakia, you start to reflect the contradictions of historical education, of propaganda, of historical narratives. That you are in a regime which is quite oppressive. But the historical narratives of which are posing freedom in the very middle of tradition. So that was the first point, maybe, and the second point would be maybe I started to have contact with historical narratives in other countries. So I could observe this the same in East Germany, in Poland, in Italy, and in Soviet Union, even, and so on. So depending of my age, of the phase of my socialization, personal socialization.
So I guess exposure, right, was one of the factors.
Yeah, anyway.
That's great. Thank you so much, Martin. We are moving a little bit up north to Estonia.
Yes, so I would like to say that in the last days, I have felt strongly than ever that to describe quite short word, freedom, it means that we have to use billions of words. Because the freedom itself, I think, is understood quite differently in different nations, in different narratives, in different persons by themselves. And if I think about my own research on the topic of the members of the resistance against the Soviet occupation from 1944 till basically 1991, then I can also see quite clear and distinctive difference in how the members of the resistance in different decades understood the meaning of freedom. And for example, those persons who started the armed resistance in 1944, they were also the persons who had fought in the Estonian War of Independence from 1918 till 1920. They were the so-called fathers and mothers of the free Estonian state. So they had a clear understanding why they are fighting, what for they are fighting, and what the freedom was, because they had built the freedom by themselves. In the end of 1940s and already in the beginning of 1950s, the second generation of resistance stepped to the arena, so to speak, and they were the students and pupils. And they were the persons or human beings who had actually grown up in the Estonian Republic. So their childhood, the best time of their life, as we all know, the childhood is usually, it was in the Estonian Republic, so they wanted to get it back. They were not fighting generally with arms or weapons. They tried to use the influence of the kind word, different leaflets, banners, raising the Estonian national flag that was forbidden and so on. But for them, freedom was the memory of their childhood and something that was really tightly connected with their families. Later on, in 1960s and 70s, we had the dissident movement, and it originated from the persons who had actually born in the end of 1930s, so their knowledge or memory of the free Estonian state was quite vague, I would say. They were like 3, 4, maybe 5 years old, so they had only very few, very small memories, but they had the emotion of their fathers and mothers, of their grandfathers and grandmothers. So they knew that they would like to live in that state, not in the Soviet, under the Soviet rule. And of course, if we keep in mind that from the Estonian population, which is and was much smaller than is the population of the city of Warsaw, 1.2 million of Estonians in the world, and at the time as well, then almost every fifth of Estonian was somehow repressed by the Soviets. So the story of repression was present in almost every family. And that united people to remember and carry on the memory of the lost family members, but also the cause why they lost their lives or their families. So the remembrance of the memory in that sense, I think from every decade to decade, it actually changed a bit. But the ultimate goal to restore Estonian independent republic was the same. That was the goal of freedom, but how the freedom actually was in that almost forgotten time for them, that was very different. And today we can see the same thing also with the children, because the generation who is born, let's say, in the 21st century, they have never felt, on the Estonian soil at least, the lackness of freedoms. The only time when they're like really troubled or seem that some kind of principle, law or principle freedom is somehow abolished or kind of like stopped is in the moment when they don't have Wi-Fi or internet or social media. Because then they're concerned like that I can't get to Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, what's going on. And of course for the older generations it's really hard to understand that you have a screen in your hand, like that's not freedom. But for them it is, because they have never seen the moments when the actual freedoms, the freedom to speech, the freedom of press, freedom to live is taken away. And of course there is this kind of like somewhat of contradiction or problems between the generations, because the older ones who have actually survived the repressions, who have returned from the Gulag labor camps, who have survived the battles with the Soviet state security forces, they seem that the younger ones don't care. But I'm not that hopeless, but because I believe that the younger ones do care, and in the moment when it starts to seem that the actual freedoms are going to get lost or somebody wants to try to take them away, then the younger ones would stand against that, because then they realize that they're also going to lose something. As a final remark of my sentences right now, I would like to stress out that for me personally, there is one thing that for me it feels strange. When I read on the first day of the symposium on the big screen the word pair of commemorating freedom, then I had the chills, because for me personally, freedom isn't in a museum. Freedom is here, around us, on the present day, in the future as well. And I think in Estonia, actually, we had the same discussion a couple of years ago when one museum changed its name to the Museum of Freedom. Then quite a big part of the population started to ask that, but how it's possible to put freedom in a museum? It means that we don't have the freedom anymore if it's past, because museums are about the past. And I know that the freedom itself and also the remembrance or commemoration can be translated and felt differently. And I think in Europe it's generally a good thing when we have the diversity of the thoughts and ideas. But I would just like to stress it out that for me it's unacceptable to put freedom into a museum in that sense. Freedom is present and freedom is our future.
Let's not put freedom in the museum, but I was wondering, you mentioned this kind of evolution and how different generations that were part of building, part of freedom movements, building the nation and so on and so on, and then how this kind of, not memory, but I guess the feeling of freedom disappeared because there was a new generation that never experienced this, and so on and so on. So I was wondering, how did you pass this message then? You mentioned something that they had a vague knowledge, but their parents sort of shared the emotions, right, and the memory of freedom. How was it passed?
Well, I can speak of personal recollection. As I was born in the end of 1985, so I kind of vaguely remember the end of the Soviet era in Estonia. But I do remember that when I was in the kindergarten, then I had this special notebook where I draw like ships and tanks and aeroplanes and everything. And in that notebook, as my grandfather stated, when I colored the flag into a plane or a ship, then in that notebook I always used the blue, black and white, which were the abolished colors of Estonian flag. And my grandfather told me that when you're at home and drawing into this notebook, then you will always use blue, black and white because this is what you are. This is what you really are. But when you go to the kindergarten, then you can't use those colors because the people won't understand and it might get you into trouble like it did with my own brother. But you have to remember that your true colors are blue, black and white. Of course, when you're 5 years old, then it's really hard to put it to context because although some museum teachers say that it's totally okay and possible to give the explanation to a 4-year-old what the deportation or execution actually is, then in my experience with first grade in a museum, I got the drama, they got the drama, and they didn't understand because they're too young. And I also didn't understand, but I felt the connection between my grandfather and the blue, black and white. And as a family, I understood that this is a value that we have to share. This is something important for my family. So we did. When I used that notebook, I drew blue, black and white, and I always knew that this is the true colors of Estonia. So when we regained our independence and the blue, black and white was out there, then I realized that this is something that my grandfather always wanted to see. This was part of him and therefore also part of me.
It's interesting how you make something purely symbolic, which is a flag, which are colors, so personal. Thank you so much. Laura, I would like to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and apologies of having a little bit spring flu here, but I hope to make it rhetorically clear anyhow. Yes, I think already mentioned that the use of freedom varies definitely, both when you think about historic layers, historically starting from French Revolution until these days we have plenty of freedom layers, so to say, both when it comes to European understanding, then national or local understanding. So it's, as an historian, I always try to see the context so that we are not on equal basis, but have a varied understanding of freedom. When it comes to my country, Finland, probably heard of the country sometimes. Nobody really knows what it is and where it's located. Next year you know maybe more about both Finland and its capital city, Helsinki. But as a historian, I usually teach my students by using the French historian's Pierre Norat's notion of memory place, or lieu de mémoire, auf Deutsch Erinnerungsorte, or in English, memory place. Because I think that notion is very good, because it shows exactly, as the Germans have been doing, that every nation has its Erinnerungsorte. And as you mentioned, that nationalism as a European idea creates rather same kind of approaches. Czech Republic, Finland, France, Russia, Sweden. If you know one nationalism, you can follow up the nationalistic structure in every nation. And I learned this very clearly when I did my grand tour in Balkan a couple of years ago, visiting Serbia among other countries, and seeing the Serbian narrative existing there, and the spirit of historical approach. I thought, good grief, this is like Finland, coming home. Exactly the same kind of narrative, exactly the same kind of argumentation, exactly the same kind of poetry behind explaining what the nation is all about. And of course the context, being located in between what we always define as East or West, which of course is a geopolitics that varies a lot. But in this context, I think both Serbian people and Finnish people have clear understanding where the East is located. We in Finland having the longest border with Russia or Soviet Union, today called Russia again, and Serbia being located, and its capital city, Belgrade, being located in the Donau and Sava, exactly at the rivers where you can see, you know, there is the West and there is the East behind. So that was my lesson on understanding nationalisms as a kind of very locally rooted, but at the same time very transnationally open possibilities to comparisons. Right, but what are the lieux de mémoires, the memory places in Finnish history? They are always at the same time European, national and local, so you can follow up the path. To start with the context, it's always Sweden, 600 years, part of the Swedish realm. It's always Russia, 100 years as a part of Russian Empire. And it's always Germany, because Germany has been influencing the Nordic and the Finnish culture centuries. To start with the Lutheranism, and following up the education, university, municipal governance, whatever you wish to see the urban developments according to German model. So this is the context, and when the context changes, which is now and then does, as we know, right at the moment, the Finnish history changes, and how we interpret changes as well. And where comes the freedom, the notion of freedom in this context? Unfortunately, I have to say it doesn't really exist in the Finnish narrative, due to the unfortunate fact that 1918 we had a bloody civil war. And you know, when a civil war takes place, like in Spain or in America, it creates division of the society. And the civil war in our country, it was short, but to be honest, very bloody, and still a central memory place. It created shared understanding of what freedom is. The winning side, the whites, together with the German troops, created the narrative that we are freeing the country from Russia, from the Tsarist Russia and its oppression. Whereas the Reds, meaning the working class, who worked together with Moscow and St. Petersburg, argued that we are going to free ourselves from the upper class dominance. It was a class fight. And still you can see, when using, 100 years later, I mean, we had the 2018 memory year for civil war, you can see this division. The right wing talks about freedom war, and the left wing talks about class war. There is not a consensus in 100 years what it was all about. And it's a messy business, of course, because the civil war was linked both with the European developments, the First World War, and especially within the Russian development, namely the revolution. So 2017, 100 years of independence celebration, was not only celebrating independence, but it was again fighting that whom are we to blame or whom are we to thank of the Finnish freedom. We don't use the notion of freedom, we use the notion of independence. And there is a big difference. So the freedom narrative is not really understood in the same sense as in the Central European context or in Estonia. The second time freedom was tested was during the Second World War. And quite few people know that Finland was one of the few countries in war which was not occupied by the enemy, namely the Soviet Union. That we had our separate forts in 1939 and 1942 onwards, but Finland was not occupied. And that created something. It was not fighting for freedom, it was fighting for independence again. And the myth of Finnish having a separate war against Soviet Union was very strong during the Cold War, especially when everybody knew that it didn't succeed without heavy help from Nazi Germany. So this is one of the history politics debated at the moment. But anyhow, what happened? Finland kept the independence, and good continue with the parliamentary system existed already before the war. And earlier the memoir was born, the Winter War, and the so-called spirit of Winter War, fighting but not giving up. And this myth is still used, I mean, the spirit of Winter War. Can't you politicians do what we did during the Winter War? Keep up the spirit. It's a very strong myth. Then 1960s, in all Nordic countries, and that's, I think, we give the Scandinavian or Nordic dimension to the narrative, is the so-called welfare state narrative, which is very strongly rooted in our understanding in Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Denmark, and Iceland, I presume. The word of freedom is never mentioned when we talk about welfare, but of course it was freeing ourselves from the poverty and from the class society and from the division of society between agrarian and urban. But the notion of freedom is non-existing, although it's all about freeing ourselves. The next year, the memoir is 1995. Of course, the end of the Cold War and the collapse of Soviet Union changed a lot due to the long dependence on Soviet, especially when it comes to trade. It was collapse for the Finnish self-understanding, and joining European Union is truly a lieu de mémoire. And the language which was used at that time, I remember it very clear because participated in the discussion. At that time, it was a security-based. You know, Finns used the notion going back to Europe. Of course, we had been there, 800 years or however you count it. But mentally, it meant going back, not free ourselves from something, but be part of something that allowed us to be free from the Soviet or Eastern dominance. And how the historiography will be influenced by joining the NATO a year ago, it's still open. Is it a path to free ourselves from something, or is it a path for more dependence? That remains to be seen, and I hope next generation of historians will answer that. And just one short dimension of the Finnish interior politics. You also mentioned that there are so-called foreign classes in society. In Finland, we have a very long tradition of Swedish presence. Swedish being the number 2 language, official language in Finland. And the division of the society started as a kind of fight, which language is the national language? The Swedish, the language of education, governance, upper classes, or Finnish, the language of peasantry, countryside. of course majority of the people. So this interaction between the Swedish and Finnish issue has been very central. But not again, it's not linked with the notion of freedom, it's linked with the notion of cultural understanding. So here maybe some aspects and more in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you also mentioned, you discussed the evolution of, you said that you did not use the word freedom throughout all this time. You mentioned fight for independence, freeing from division, secure-based, and so on and so on. You mentioned that now, what is happening now, it's still to be seen. But where do you think it's going? Can you give us certain terms in how do you see freedom in Finland at the moment? What is it?
Well, for the first, it's of course freedom to act in a free basis. And that's exactly what happened with the NATO decision a couple of years ago after Ukraine crisis, when we started energetically the discussion about joining NATO. It had been existing 30 years, of course, after the collapse of Cold War. But as we Finns tend to think that we are real politicians, that we are not making harsh decisions, so the NATO existed in the marginality, driven by some military enthusiasts and right-wing politicians. But after the Ukrainian crisis started, February 2022, I was one of the NATO, no, definitely. If you are a good intellectual in Finland, you're definitely anti-NATO until February 2022. But immediately it switched. I mean, in my head and in many other heads, millions of heads in Finland, experienced the Russian aggression and felt, you mentioned the emotions, felt in Estonia. So suddenly the emotions came back. What does it mean that the country is occupied? And you know, Soviet Union occupied Karelia and 400,000, I repeat, 400,000 Karelians were moved to Finland and resettled. 400,000, I repeat it again. My family, German born in St. Petersburg, was one of those who moved from Vibery to Finland, completely Russian-speaking family, but became part of the Finnish society very, very quickly. So all these family memories of myself and many others in Finland were activated, snap, like you put a light on and your head was confused. And in that position, it was not at all uncertain if we join NATO or not. Yes, we did. And at the moment, it's considered to be as an act of freedom. But of course, as an historian, I know we don't know what happens tomorrow, 1 year, 10 years. And then comes the historians again and start to interpret based on the context, which we don't yet know to exist in the future. But today, I think the general feeling of safety is very strong in Finland. Not being back in Europe, but being back in Europe with the military safety guaranteed by that. And of course, then going back to the lieu de mémoire or Erinnerungsorte, the Winter War experience is very strong. We never stopped with the army, obligatory army. Every boy is forced to go into the military, and some girls do it also. It was never discussed to leave this option. So there is a kind of narrative, a little bit like in Estonia. My grandfather fought in the war, and it's a kind of tradition that you do it. So it's very easy to construct the general positive NATO attitude in this. Of course, as an intellectual, I'm a little bit worried about the cultural militarization that has taken place in my country and probably elsewhere. It's very much centered in military power, military debate, military discourse, and those people who think a little bit different way might not really have the freedom to say it.
Thank you so much. So I think the fight in Ukraine reminds us that freedom is not just the past, something that was, before, something abstract, which is probably for many of us today, as Martin perhaps referred, but also something really concrete, something that we have to fight for. So we discussed freedom as a social phenomenon and how it evolved throughout generations. I'd like to bring us to today, to present, and discuss intergenerational dialogue and societal impact. And I'd like to ask all of you about specific practices or initiatives that, in your opinion, in your countries, in your research, have been successful in bridging the gap between generations in terms of understanding and preserving the value of freedom. Łukasz, I'd like to start with you.
I didn't even have a time to write it down, your question. but fortunately, I probably know the answer from the Polish perspective. Yes, because it was my work for many years, and it was a main challenge, for example, in the Institute of National Remembrance, in which I worked for 16 years, how to pass the experience of lack of freedom to another new generation born in a free country. And as Miloš mentioned, it is also our experience even with children in my family, yes, that, for example, freedom of travel is, as you said, something natural for them. And of course, in some sense, they understand from school education how important are political freedoms, but it's still not this deep knowledge which is in our generation, which was a personal knowledge of lack of so many freedoms. And I think the basic answer we found is touching the past. So meeting with witnesses is really influential, and fortunately, for a few more decades, we will have possibility to use witness testimonies in education, personal testimonies, because it's 35 years from 1989, but it means also that for 20, 30 years we'll still have. But it's time to think what will be the next, how to teach about the lack of freedom without witnesses, because of course there will be always some kind of family remembrance, which was a few times mentioned already during our discussion, but it will be not enough. So I think the main answer that we need special places, memorial sites, we need museums, which will commemorate maybe not freedom, but freedom fight, or which will be the places of telling the history of repression, of totalitarianism, etc. And this is another part of my personal experience, yes, that even if you take this smartphone generation to the memory place, which is really impressive, like former prison execution site, and unfortunately, at least here in this part of Europe, we have a lot of them, and you tell the history of this place to young generation, they change, yes, they started to ask really good questions, yes, and to discuss also the problem of freedom in this context, yes. And so my answer is quite short. We need to secure for them a kind of personal experience, yes. And of course, it will be not first-hand experience of lack of freedom, but hopefully they will never experience it. Let's hope for it. But in sake of understanding how valuable freedom is, how important are human rights, we need to establish such a places, and we are doing it in many countries, and not only in East Central Europe. Yes, for example, in the last years, a few new memory sites were established in Spain, yes, which which political class for many years, a few decades, believed that forgetting is the best way to heal the wounds of past. Now they understood that it's first not possible, in fact, in today's reality, but it's also a mistake. Yes, that we need to remember the period of dictatorship, period of occupation. We need to remember the war. And of course, it's probably used too many times, that this slogan that this is the way how to not repeat the histories, remember about the history. But it's a slogan, it's obvious, but it works. It is working. Yeah? So I think this is the main answer. We need places to remember. We need to make a basis for memory, for remembrance of unfreedom especially, and thanks to it we will cherish our freedom.
Thank you so much. So education, museums, memorial sites, and preservation of personal experiences, right? And stories that people can tell. Milos, the same question to you, but if you can mention specific successful examples of such initiatives or projects, that would be great.
No,
so we can learn.
No, I can't. No, I can't, because the situation in the countries I'm living is very similar to Poland. I'm living in Poland, Czech Republic, and in Germany, but there are partly specific problems, partly common problems. The first problem is the so-called short memory of people. So people, not only young people today, the young generation, but even people that experience lack of freedom before 1989, sometimes are forgetting the old times, sometimes idealizing, even speaking on freedom. We were free of fear of social stability and so on, and forgetting that the lack of freedom in other contexts. And I can, it is very special challenge, for example, in East Germany, because I have experience in the regions. So structurally weak regions of periphery, the very peripheries of the former East Germany, where children are going to school, to history lessons, they learn the history, they are confronted with what I would call maybe the official narrative of communist dictatorship, coming back home, speaking with the grandfather, grandma, and they sometimes you have the reverse of the situation in the GDR, official narrative and private narrative, and the grandfather says to the child, "Oh, Quatsch, nonsense! I will tell you how it was really in the GDR." So we have. In East Germany, we have a problem to develop methods and tools of education in this context. But nobody was prepared that such a thing could occur. And one observation: we are living. You are speaking on museums. We are living in an age of museum of everything. Of everything. We have thousands of museums in Poland. But do we have any museum in our regions of museum of freedom of such? We have museums of lack of freedom, we have museums of dictatorships, we have museum of fight for freedom, but museum of freedom as such as a subject of museum, that would be maybe very interesting challenge. And one footnote from the Czech perspective, or Central European perspective, the political conflicts or the political differentiation since the 1990s has been developed alongside the understanding, partly alongside the understanding of freedom. For example, Czechia, you have two understandings. You have the very liberal one, represented by Václav Klaus, also freedom from something. We need freedom, and everything what is legal, we are free to do. and an understanding represented more by Václav Havel, a romantic one, I would say. Marcin Król, a Polish philosopher, was calling the romantic understanding of freedom. Freedom is not good as such only, but freedom is good. Why? Because freedom enables us to do something, to obtain something, to reach something. So freedom to do something. Freedom is a task, as a tool to do. And there is still middle of political differentiation. And the second one, looking at young people, the junior generation. If I am observing the young people, the teenagers, and speaking to them, they had other concerns. So they are. If we would say freedom of speech, the first reflection or connotation would not be dictatorship, communist regime, censorship, but political correctness. Political correctness. They are discussing in this context how is political correctness to be used as tool to make people free from stereotypes, oppression, exclusion, but not to limit so far the freedom of speech. So the discussion of this balance, no? That's the first connotation I can observe if I hear people at 18, age 18 year, if they are discussing for example, freedom of speech. Our first connotation is dictatorship, censorship. They had other problems. They have other connotations, other collocations.
That's why we need this dialogue between generations. Łukasz, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I would like to comment a little bit about this lack of Museum of Freedom, because there is an interesting story connected with this very building. When this museum was formally created in 2006, it was called the Museum of Freedom, of Polish Freedom. Yes, and the idea was to show that the whole history of Poland is a history of freedom in various senses, not only freedom fight, but also those political freedoms during the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, etc. And it changed, yes, so not only in the name, but in the real planned narration. Of course, there is a part devoted to freedom. But I also really would like to answer your question about the successes, because you're right, it's really hard to measure influence. Yes, I may share a lot of my personal experience that I was with the group and I saw it. Yes, but how to give any numbers? Because we see, of course, influence of new museums, like, for example, Warsaw Rising Museum in opinion polls. Yes, which can check the common image, the remembrance of the past. Yes, now it's much more important that it was. This history is much more important than it was 30 years ago. But how to measure the influence of the history of freedom or freedom fight into real change of attitudes, yes, of young generation. And I have one example, but it's and connected with your country. I was struck when I saw people in Minsk, other places in 2020 on mass demonstrations, and some of them were wearing T-shirts with single date, 1863. Which is probably not readable for many our colleagues from abroad. It's a date of January uprising in 19th century, one of many uprisings under the slogan "For your and ours freedom." And the same appears now in Ukraine. They are using, for example, some units of Ukrainian army are using the symbols of, there was a coat of arms from this uprising. So this is, for me, is a proof that memory is working, yes, that people are now defending the freedoms using the symbols from the past, yes, because they somehow see connections between other periods of lack of freedom. So, of course, it's not a scientific proof, yes, and it would be probably very hard to prove it in really scientific work, but it's so experience of so many of us working in the fields of memory that we shouldn't give up, and we should work on it, and maybe one day we will be able to build a European museum of freedom, not to put it into a museum, yes, but to cherish it, to honor it, and to show that this is a crucial value for us in Europe.
Yeah, I think museum is not for kind of hiding, but maybe for the elevation of this sort of meaning and notion, right, of freedom. But yeah, I would agree regarding the flags and T-shirts, right, that we had back in 2020 in Minsk all over the country. And it's kind of interesting that for decades the white, red, white flag, our national historic flag, was forbidden. But all of a sudden in 2020 people were out on the streets, hundreds of thousands having these flags. Where did they take it from? Did they sew it at night? This is like the nation of partisans, right, who kind of hid these flags, I guess, somewhere in their rooms or in their cupboards, in the same way that, Martin, you were describing the flag and national colors of Estonia, how it was important for you. Look, I wanted to ask you about the same question, but also about the relevance, how to make it relevant for current generations and also for future generations. We discussed before the panel, you mentioned several human stories, several experiences and interviews that you had with the victims of repression. So if you could give us an example of how you preserve this memory and how you make it relevant for the current generation and hopefully for the future generations.
Well, that was something I also wanted to say even without that question, that in my opinion, we can solve the problem of the gap between the generations in a way that we put the generation on one shore. Then we don't need the bridge and we don't have the gap. That's the most easiest way. And in my, let's say, professional career, I have made dozens of interviews with former members of the armed resistance, people who were deported to Siberia, people who voluntarily went to Gulag to be with their family, their father or their mother. And in my personal belief, overcoming the gap between the generations is to put the generations together. So I love sharing the stories of the interviews I have done because in a way, in the end of the day, everything is about humanity and personal touch. We can share the numbers of that many millions were repressed during the Soviet era, 100 millions were victims and so on, but I can't imagine how many people actually on one field 100 million would look like. But I can imagine a single person with a powerful story. And the story I was sharing before was that on one time I was interviewing this really old member of the armed resistance, forest brother as it is called in Estonia and also in Latvia. And he was really old and really sick, over 90 years old. He had a really tragical life. In one of the battles with the Soviet state security forces, he lost his brother who was shot dead next to him. Later he was captured, was sentenced to 25 years in hard labor in Gulag. When he returned from the camp alive, then he wasn't allowed to move back to his home, so he had to move like 50 kilometers away, which in Estonian case is quite far away. And while I was doing the interview, then this old man coughing terribly due to the asthma he had got in the copper mine, I asked this actually quite silly question, that if you take in mind all the things that happened to you, all the years in the forest, all the years in the active fighting, all the years in the labor camp, losing your family, your home, everything, if I would say you that in tomorrow morning it will start again, would you still do it? And on the next moment, this old, almost crippled man was standing straight behind the kitchen table, slamming his fist to the table and saying that I can go today as well. But you have to give me a machine gun because I can't move without a stick. So I would use the machine gun as a stick and I would go and I would fight back. And for sure, this time I won't return because I'm so old, they would kill me. But if we don't stand for ourselves, then who is going to stand for us? And this is one of the powerful stories. And if I tell it to the children or the school kids, then they understand that because this is a personal reflection, personal emotion of somebody who says that he is willing to die for you. And when I asked the same man a question that does he remember how Estonia regained its independence on the 20th of August 1991, then he replied that he remembers that day really well because he was out in the fields working, and when he returned late in the evening to his home and switched on his TV, then on the same moment, and I quote, "They said to me in the TV that you are now free." That was the moment when we declared the restoration of the Estonian independence. And I asked him that, but what were your feelings? How did you feel yourself? And the old man, over 90 years old, just silently replied, "I cried, because I had won. They tried to erase me from the face of the earth. They tried to lose everything I loved for, but in the end, I won." And it didn't matter, it doesn't matter that it was decades after the actual armed struggle for freedom. It didn't matter, because in the end, I was alive and I won. And the younger generations, they do understand those stories and they listen to those stories. And a couple of years ago, actually, we had this kind of success story. And truth to be told, it was kind of an accident, actually. Because one of my colleagues came up with this idea that for the National Day of commemoration of the March deportation, we should call out this competition for school children to write a letter into the past. To write a letter to a person who is being deported at the very moment, or is being put into the cattle wagon and shipped to Siberia. To write into the same very moment, to pick an actual human being from the history or their own relatives, and to write a letter describing why this is happening, what will happen to those persons if they stayed alive, to comfort them that in the end, everything will be all right. And even in the case when those persons perished, to tell them that in that letter. And at first glimpse, I looked at the idea and I thought that, well, this is crazy. Nobody will write anything because this is so abstract. And we had numerous letters coming in. And when I opened them, then I was also afraid that, well, this is not going to be anything wise. But they were. Because the younger generation, they took out the database of the victims of communism, they spoke with their parents and grandparents, and they looked for actual real-life stories. And they wrote letters. And even if they had to state in the letter that, "I'm really sorry to say to you, but you won't make it back to home. But I hope that in some ways it will comfort you that many of your fellow Estonians who are there, they will make it. And in the end, we will restore our independence. And I'm so sorry that you won't be able to see that, but please keep in mind that in the end, the goodness wins." Now, for the past years, on the national event of the remembrance on the Estonian memorial dedicated to the victims of communism, the so-called winning letter is also read. It's just after the speech of the Estonian president, prime minister, the representative of the diplomatic corps, and it's really hard to actually choose the winning letter. In first year, I read through all the letters, then when we were discussing who will be the 5 like the best works, then I reread them, and on the second year I said that I can't read them twice, because all of them are winning letters. So based on the first emotion, I would just state that this seems like the best one for me, and every year when the letter is actually read by the same schoolgirl or boy from like 12-year-old to 16-year-old, and when they personally read that letter in the memorial, then even the members of the diplomatic corps, they're wiping tears. Because we can see that there is the connection and there is the understanding of what actually happened. And in my firm belief, all the museums, all the memorial places have to be used in a way where the younger generations have the personal touch with somebody. Because especially in the world of smartphones, we have the digital media all around us, but on those very specific places, we can have them to touch the history. And I think this is really, really vital. And for a very short remark, I would like to add to Laura that if the Finns had the narrative of independence, then the Estonian on the same time had the narrative of Finnish freedom because you resisted. And that helped us a lot.
Laura, you now have the toughest task. I'd like you to add to the cake. We mentioned education, we mentioned museums, memorial sites. Importantly, we also mentioned personal touch and how to put generations together. Do you have anything to add? You mentioned the war on Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, and the context that it provides the Finnish people with, and I guess the whole Europe with. So the strength of the context, maybe something else. Would you like to add anything to the successful initiatives that we've been discussing?
Yeah. Of course, the Ukrainian spring 2022 was one that was an over-generational reaction. I mean, never seen so many people protesting in Helsinki, all ages and all social groups, all whatever ethnic, religious, multiculturalism there is in Finland was rather united. So, and of course, Ukrainian case was a way for us to reflect our own emotions and our own history. That's essential in understanding and of course in all other countries as well. But looking a little bit of the over-generational aspect, I sent a WhatsApp message to my children. They are grown up already yesterday, well-educated, middle-class Helsinki young people, that what would you be willing to fight for if you are losing your freedom? Knowing that it's a little bit messy and complex question. But the answer was quite interesting. They both said that we are really prepared to fight for something we have at the moment, without defining what exactly they are having. But I think there is the understanding of a kind of, as I mentioned, we are not the nation which all the time emphasizes the freedom narrative, but the independence narrative. So I think number one is the independence narrative. Although you don't repeat it every morning, I look into the mirror and say that I'm independent Finnish woman or man or girl or boy. But it's a kind of mega narrative, and what united people in a very interesting way, 2017, when we had the anniversary, 100-year of anniversary of independence, throughout the whole year. And as usual, schools are essential in spreading this kind of, as we have already been discussing. But not only schools, civic societies, student organizations, working places, whatever you can imagine, even private families had fantastic, interesting, nice champagne celebrations. First time nobody has ever champagne celebrated Finnish independence, because it's in December, it's dark, it's very heavily loaded with the state ceremonies. The army, the president has his reception, and the priests have their own message. Students walk in the streets with the torch in the hands, no champagne included. But surprisingly, 100 years later, it was a kind of family occasion with lovely celebrations, nice speeches, singing, a little bit drinking as well. And finally, in the evening, everybody gathered in Helsinki and in the big cities, in the city square. So it was a kind of lovely development for a historian to see how this rather artificial celebration, 1918, 1919, 1920, etc., had turned into a very peaceful and polite celebration. Now, what unites the generation, you probably have heard of the ridiculous notion, Finland being the happiest country in the world. So now I think it's the 8th time we heard it again, and the result is that everybody is laughing, I mean falling into the floor and laughing, that we, the happiest country in the nation, look at our climate, look at our drinking habits, look at our this and that. But in the end, as a historian, I have been forced to explain many times that what does this happiest country in the nation mean? We in Finland tend to think that Italian and French are the happy, they have wine and they have restaurants and they have lovely sociability around them. But actually what unites, I think, but it's never pronunciated actually, is the trust in the system. That you can trust the political system, meaning it's not corrupted. All in all, I mean, if you follow up the Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian or Danish political culture, we have 40,000 employees in the city of Helsinki throughout 8 years, and only 5 cases of corruption you can follow up, and it's a huge thing. So it's a country which is not corrupt. You cannot buy money political decision making or favors or whatever. And I think happiness is based in this kind of trust that the police does what the police has to be doing, the mayor does what she or he is supposed to do, etc. Civil servant, yes, his work is based on law, on legal understanding. The parliament makes the laws and we vote the people inside. So the over-generational understanding of freedom, I think, is based on understanding that the system functions. And it took 100 years to build the system after the Civil War, and still we have the division. I mean, the Civil War exists in the society, although nobody speaks every day about it. But let's say in every presidential election, you can see 49-51, what kind of president is elected. So 1918 is repeated there. This time we got a nice right-wing guy, yes. Last time it was a nice social democratic lady, etc. But the division is there. So I would like to say that the over-generational aspect in a country like Finland, based on the Nordic welfare structure, is really loyalty towards the lifestyle and the freedom the lifestyle represents. It's not maybe so much politically articulated, it's more civic society activity, and it's more free understanding of the freedom of being who we are, what my daughter replied yesterday. What makes, of course, Ukraine put people on the street, but what else puts Finnish people into the street? Winning ice hockey, number one. Unfortunately, it didn't happen yesterday. We lost against Sweden, and that's a terrible thing. The second, if you want to close up a library somewhere in a suburb, that's when people get into the street. You are willing to force close services. And library is a kind of symbol. It's not library only where you have books to borrow, but it's a symbol of education and symbol of national understanding of reading and literature and books. And that's something that puts really all generations, I mean, from parents with babies until grandmothers and grandfathers, to protect and preserve the libraries. So I think the freedom in a kind of Finnish context is freedom of having your own values, your own lifestyle. It might be weird, it might be happiest in somebody's eyes, but anyhow, it's a kind of, it's not a systematic or political, but it's a mental and emotional freedom. And I think it's very difficult to pronunciate it, even in my own country. This sounds very weird, what I'm talking about. But I try to interpret it and make a little bit difference. And of course, at the same time, we have the political history that is comparable with the Polish, Estonian, Czech, etc. Experience, and that creates a very strong bondage, because behind there we have the Russia, or Soviet Union, or whatever, the Imperium Russicum. It's part of our history, we have to deal it. And maybe one more notion based on the conference we have been being here is I mean, quite much of the presentations here have been linked to the Second World War. Of course, because it's our memory place in the European level and nation-based and locally. But it's very important to see the differences, and I'm always thinking about the Finnish case. that we lost the fight but won the war because we didn't lose our independence. And the emotional feelings are so important, that are you on the winning side, and that you can see every May in Europe, if you are the winner of the Second World War, or if you lost the war. So the emotions created around these senses are very, very important. You can't teach history without teaching these senses and emotions. That's, at the same time, it's a great fascination, and at the same time it's very dangerous, because touching on people's emotions can be very political and very dangerous also. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm probably not the best representative of this smartphone generation, right? As somebody of you mentioned. I'm somewhere, I guess, in the middle, if I may say so. But I was actually wondering throughout this panel, not only about, of course, how we sort of prevent or warn or scare, in a way, from the lack of freedom, but also how we celebrate it, how we promote it, how we, you mentioned that Finland is the happiest nation. You mentioned this celebration, right? And I think this is also very relevant for us, smartphone generations. But let us switch to, we still have some time left, and I would encourage you to also think about your questions already, because there will be soon a great moment to ask them. But let us perhaps briefly, it's a very wide and broad topic, but let us briefly discuss nationalism and kind of the discussion about human rights and national sovereignty, the tensions and how sort of human rights, the discussion between human rights and national sovereignty, and how it poses significant challenges to the traditional concept of freedom. And Łukasz, I will start with you again. Just saying, if you need to write this question down. How is the traditional concept of freedom based on human rights being challenged by the increasing emphasis on national sovereignty?
It's not so easy to answer this question, but maybe I will start that with saying that we have freedom in our national slogan. So already mentioned, for your freedom and ours. In the past, it was connected because, of course, in the 19th century, many social issues from the period of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were still there. And they were important. So our first uprising in 1794 was connected, yes, also with an attempt of social reform. Yes? So since the beginning, we may say, the fight for freedom in the sense of independence of the country was connected, and I'm not saying that it was, especially in the first years, prevailing point of view on this issue was connected, that fighting for political freedom of our country or independence of our country, we need to solve some internal issues here, because we have big social groups which are excluded from, for example, from the political system, which are in the form of enslavement. In fact, economic issues, and during all other uprisings, there were attempts to at least promise some changes in this field. In 1980, what was considered as a greatest success of this period of freedom fight. So when we regained our independence, we needed to also to protect it, and especially from the Soviet invasion of Poland, was and it is still regarded as a big success, was convincing the peasantry that this is also their issue. Yes, and in sake of their freedom, but also in sake of finally solving all social issues, first we need independent country. There was, of course, also the big division in the socialist movement in this time, yes, and the part was also, Polish Socialist Party was claiming the first we need an independent country, and then we will introduce a better and economic and political system. Others, mainly the communists, claim that it's out of sense, that the global revolution will solve all of the problems. So I think we have a quite good tradition to discuss such a complex issue, but I'm afraid that because of many reasons, also because of change of borders probably after the Second World War and this whole shift of Poland a few hundred kilometers to the west, for many years we were not sensitive on this issue. So it was rather, very simplifying interpretation of the past as ours. So general Polish nations fight for freedom in both senses, but mainly this sense of independence of the country. But what is interesting that, again, during the Solidarity Revolution of 1980s, we started to again debate, yes, what were, for example, our relations with other nations in our Commonwealth, yes, that we started to see that the Polish point of view is not the only possible one, and what was for us, the freedom fight, sometimes for others was quite opposite. So I think now we are, again, somewhere in the middle of the process, and I repeat it, but it's a fact. I think this museum will be very important from this point of view, yes, because we will confront, for the first time, we will have in one single place an attempt to present the whole history of Poland. And we'll confront it also with the nations which used to share the same country with us. And we will see if they will accept this vision of the past, yes, which probably is still very Polonocentric, yes? But we are at least aware that, and I think it will be visible. I know that the scenario of the permanent exhibitions, that we will see this also in the exhibition, yes? That first of all, the issue of freedom is much more complex than only the independence of the country, yes, or political freedom of a specific social group. But we will see also the fact return of the narrative that our freedom, our history is a part of history of Polish people, but Polish people in the past didn't mean only the Poles, yes, as a nation. So this nationalistic perspective of 19th century and the next decades.
As a Belarusian, I can confirm. Miloš, I'd like to pass the word to you. The same question: how do current debates over nationalism and human rights reflect the broader trends of understanding of freedom in Europe? Or if you want to reflect to what Łukasz said, you live here, but as I understand, you're not Polish, you're from Czechia. So please, the floor is yours. Don't fight, though.
So the freedom means only also the possibility to be free from my own nationality or national identity. But of course, for the very beginnings of the national and during the modern nation building in the 19th century in our region, Central and Eastern and Northern Europe, the idea of nationality was very strongly connected with liberalism and democratism. So nation was a tool to overcome the limitations in the society given by the estates system. And for that reason, there was a large possibility or opportunity for cooperations of nationalists from Poland, Hungary, Italy, Germany during the 19th century. And connected with a new idea of freedom and equality. In Czech case, that we had the situation, you have Czech language, which had the function of language of the people, and German with the function of elite language. So you had low German language, high German language, and low Czech language. And the function for high language for Czech was German. So so the people. So the condition for individuals for social emancipation through career or so on was to change language. So from low Czech to high German. And the new idea was the freedom from this necessity. If we are equal, so it must be possible for Czech people to make social emancipation without abandoning their native culture and language. That was the reason for developing high Czech language, so grammar, so standard Czech grammar. The same case in Estonia, in Lithuania, in Slovakia, Norway, and so on and so on. And somehow it is very interesting. So different understandings and kinds of idea for freedom still are connected with nationalism till today. So look at Marine Le Pen. Every speech of her ends with the exclamation "Liberté." No? The German Alternative für AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, try to convince people that they are fighting for the very freedom from the oppression of liberal Western elites. The same it's true for Polish conservative national thought, arguing that we shall emancipate from the domination of Western liberals. So standing up from knees. No? So an idea of emancipation as kind of freedom is still present in nationalist movements till today, and we are going back to the question of understanding of freedom and connection, freedom and independence. No? Freedom is it the same? And looking at Czech experience in the 19th century, means freedom, national political independence? Definitely not. The Czech idea was to reorganize Habsburg monarchy as a kind of federation, of monarchical federation, with Habsburg as kings of Hungary and Bohemia and so on, emperors, to have an our nationalized, multinational empire, which would be able to guarantee the free development, of national cultures in this space between Russia and Germany. So to defend small people, small nations in Central Europe, that was the historical mission from the perspective of Czech nationalists. The historical mission of Austria is to defend small countries, small nations in Central Europe against the German and Russian imperialism. And this idea was abandoned only during the First World War. And that was also the idea. So we can guarantee our freedom, if our independence, no? or our freedom, not through state independence, but to belonging at the same time, at least, to a larger context. And in the 1990s, if we don't have the Habsburg monarchy anymore, so we need the European Union instead of that. That's the Czech way of thinking about European integration. To belong, to be secure, and that's the connection to your speech. So we have freedom, and sometimes security, trust. No? Trust is a kind of security feeling, the feeling to be secure. Sometimes it's considered as something which is contradictory to freedom. So the more security, the less freedom you have, and that's not the case. So the balance between freedom and security is the very focal point of thinking about freedom, I think. So because feeling of security is part of freedom.
which is very relevant, I think, for Estonia and Finland. Martin?
Yes, well, I would like to start with the remark that in 1920s in Estonian Republic there was a separate law that stated that, let's say, in translation, the ethnic minorities, who consist of at least 2,000 persons who believe that they are representatives of those ethnics, they had the possibility to have their own schools, their own cultural association, and the Estonian state in any possible ways try to support them in their activities so they won't forget who they are. But in the same time, they were also part of the Estonian state and the Estonian society. In 1990s, already in the first part of 1990s, after regaining our independence, the Estonian president at the time, Lennart Meri, who was also deported in 1941 by the Soviets with his father and mother, he also stated that Europe is a collection of different nations, different languages, different thoughts of mind that all respect each other, who all listen to each other, and who understand each other. And this is the stability and peace that Estonia needs for. And I really like this idea, although it's already now more than 30 years old, but I still believe that this is the European value and the collection of different rights and freedoms in Europe that we have to cherish and keep. And I would state that the variety of also the different thoughts we have heard during this week about different topics, it's also the true value of our collaboration and our coexistence, because we can speak, we can listen, and we can discuss, and we don't have to fight.
Thank you. And Laura, the same question.
Yes, about nationalism and national identity. I personally wondered for a long time the difference between being a nationalist and being a patriot. And starting from the personal experience, as being a historian who has studied quite a lot about nationalisms in Europe and particularly in Scandinavian countries, how it has been shaped, and what kind of lieu de memoirs have been created during different time, and understanding the general aspect and also the emotional aspect, and saying at the same time that I'm not a nationalist, but I'm a patriot. I don't know if we have a shared understanding what patriot means, but for me it means that you can love your fatherland, or in Finnish, rakastaa isänmaata. It sounds very, nobody says that today, without excluding others. And that's, I think, is you can be an European patriot living in Helsinki, which gives you several identities. You're an urban citizen, a capital city girl. At the same time, you love your fatherland, and at the same time, you feel a very strong European senses. Can you exclude of being nationalist from that package? I don't know. But as a researcher of nationalisms, I think nationalism is a very dangerous notion. And I'd rather love my fatherland than exclude others' feelings for their fatherland. So it's very difficult, of course. You can understand who defines whose patriotism is the right kind of, whose nationalism is the right one. And this is a kind of balance we have to do every day. And historians are a little bit weird category, because we do not really accept or bite whatever is served to us, because we understand how nationalisms are created, who created them, under what kind of circumstances, and how they have developed. I mean, how the nationalist thinking has been developed during different political and social contexts. And the picture is very varied. There is never dark and never white, but the gray is in between very strong. So that creates a kind of relative thinking. And I understand that in many countries, historians are considered to be not very pleasant persons, because what research come out doesn't always correspond what the great audience wants to hear. And this is the role I have been balancing with. Understanding what happened in the past gives a very strong relative approach to the present politics. And at the same time, yes, it creates an understanding, and it creates an emotion and even devotion and loyalism towards your own home country. So it's very, very challenging, to be honest. Okay, the national narrative, I think, because we haven't been using nationalist language in Nordic countries for decades, but the national narrative was the narrative of modernism and modernization in the post-war years. And mention again the welfare society, which is an abstract construction, but it brings in, if you say a welfare society in Nordic countries, everybody can read it on equal basis. It's a nationalist narrative of creating services, institutions, and laws that protect welfare to everybody. So mentioning again nationalistic approach is that it's a kind of political idea that it's very inclusive, and both right-wing and left-wing and the center parties are in favor of welfare state. And that is a kind of national effort. It has been a national effort. And the modernism behind has been exactly as you mentioned, the idea that you free yourself from the class hierarchies and from the institutions in the past, including the church or religion. It's very essential in this process. If you are liberal, educated, upper middle class, Finnish member of the society, you usually tend to be very negative towards institutions like church or folklore or whatever is linked with the past. And that's a weird thing. We don't have in Finland National History Museum. It doesn't exist. We have Finnish National Museum, but it's an ethnographic. It's a collections, it's ethnographical collections. It's not historical collections. I was doing with my colleague 30 years ago, mid-1990s, we had a task to create exhibition for Finnish national, or it was actually independence history exhibition. But it didn't really work out. It's a difficult task. And this shows how difficult this concept of nationalism and history to put into the frame of a country like Finland, where the narrative is different. But anyhow, we have emotions, and it's nice to be a Finn, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dear audience, do you have questions? We have Julia with the mic. Can you raise your hands? No questions? No, wait, no. No, I don't really see well. Yeah, I mean, lunch of course is great, but we have still food for thought, not only the...
Maybe only a footnote to the last remark. A footnote to the last remark, maybe. An interesting thing, history, national history and museumization. There is a very interesting, you mentioned the lack of this museum in Finland, and there is a very interesting model in Slovakia. In Slovakia, there is a Czech museum, a Croatian museum, a German museum, a Hungarian museum, a Roma museum, and Ruthenian or Ukrainian museum, and altogether are part of Slovak National Museum. So they altogether established a Slovak National Museum. That's a very interesting case of defining the nationality of a museum by integrating very different ethnicities and nationalities. So the transnationality of national definition, yes.
Has it been done? Has anybody tried to do it?
Yes. It does exist, such a structure.
I have another reflection inspired by what Laura said about nationalism and patriotism, and I think it's a huge challenge for memorial institutions which are dealing with the totalitarian past too, because both history of victimhood and history of freedom fight may be misused. Yes? We have two main ways how to narrate it. First, that we are the most important victims, we are unique, or we are the best freedom fighters in the history of the world and it gives us some privileges, or we are telling the history of our victims or our freedom fight to show that there are others, that it is a part of universal history. Yes, and it's probably what we could call this patriotic version of memorialization of freedom fight or repression, because every good thing can be misused. So also the remembrance of the past may be used for building some nationalist approach or something. So it's our, again, responsibility as people who represent various kinds of memory institutions.
It would be very nice to have in this kind of panel representatives, let's say, for example, from Great Britain or the Netherlands or Spain or Portugal, countries where the tradition is a little bit different. I've been wondering quite a lot, following up now, as you all maybe have been doing, what happens in the royal house of Great Britain. And how the funeral of Queen Elizabeth and the coronation of King Charles and his spouse took place. And millions of people were watching this, you could say show, but it's definitely not a show. It's a deeply rooted political action underlining the existence of monarchy as the oldest European state form. And when following up this British tradition and the Commonwealth understanding of it, it's not only Great Britain, but it's the whole Commonwealth, and in the past the British Imperium, how the notion of freedom is understood in this kind of context. That what is the opposition of freedom? Is it this kind of monarchy or royal tradition where people don't want to be freed? I mean, if you ask common people in Great Britain and follow the ceremonies, millions of people were gathering and saying, we are so proud of our king or our queen. We don't want to be freed from them. So how shall we, I mean, it would be nice to have a kind of, let's say, different kind of tradition included in this discussion to understand the different notions of freedom and how freedom is understood in the political system of Great Britain, which is deeply rooted in a very conservative and very upper-class hierarchical structure, and where modern people say that, yeah, this structure makes us feel free and safe. It's very interesting.
And also, I mean, the close examples to your country, right, Sweden and Norway, which...
Sweden, Denmark, yeah.
Norway, right, which is one of the most democratic states, right, always like the leader when it comes to press freedom and so on, even though they have a king, right? We have a question. Thank you so much for saving me from being the only one who asks naive questions. So finally we will get a professional one.
So, thank you. The expectations is higher than I thought.
No pressure.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. And I have a question to all of you. But it is not impossible that this question was already asked at the first part of the discussion which I couldn't hear. So if it is the case, please don't answer it once again. But it's a double question. Which international events influence, in your opinion, the narration about freedom in your countries? That is the first question. And the other question is, which events in your countries you would like to make more visible in the international dialogue about history of 20th century?
The second one is quite easy. In case of Poland, it would be probably the history of solidarity in the context of freedom fight, etc. But not only. Yes, it's a very unique civic movement which, in fact, inspired many movements around the world, not only in Europe, but even in Asia. There were some groups referring to this experience. So. This part of answer is quite easy, at least from my point of view. Much harder is the question: what is the influence of any international event or foreign event? And of course, for many years we were under the pressure to accept the narration that October Revolution in Russia was such a event, because it was even implemented in Polish history in the sense that it was a key event for Poland to regain independence in 1980. Was October Revolution in Russia, and maybe because of that we are a little bit suspicious for any other suggestions that other events could play this role. Unfortunately, the end of Second World War, which for a big part of Europe may be such a referring point in the sense of history of freedom, is not valid for us for obvious reason. French Revolution also not, because of some other reasons. I think for many years, it's rather my observation as historian, so I'm now referring to the communist time, the history of United States was inspiring, but it's rather in the form of myth, not of some concrete events, but United States was seen as the most free country in the world. So I will answer this way. But I think maybe I would just add the third point to this. I think if you are speaking about the European context, we should look for some such a common places in history. And I think that 1989, understood of course in the sense 1989 till 1991, so the fall of Soviet Union, could be such a pan-European reference point in the sense of history of freedom, not only for East Central Europe, because this is the thing which is, for example, for me, is missing in the House of European History in Brussels. This aspect, of course, 1989 is present here, but only as a, the moment of liberation of East Central Europe. But it's also the huge victory of European values, including freedom. Yes, because it's a proof that it's something important, worth fighting for. Freedom, justice, truth, human dignity, etc. So I think I would reverse this question, yes, that it should be an offer of our region to the whole Europe to remember 1989 as a crucial point in the history of Europe, because it allowed the real unification of Europe, but it also is another proof in the long European history that the freedoms, a basic European value, and we should build our identity as Europeans on this value.
There are two countries that are still fighting, though.
Yes, and still remembering us, yes. But even for those countries, there was a hope after 1989, yes? Unfortunately, both Belarus and Ukraine still are not still not succeeded in this way, yes? But without 1989, it wouldn't possibly even now fight on such a scale for freedom.
Miłosz? It was a question for all of you.
We have only 4 minutes, and I would largely only repeat what was said. I would be, only one remark, I would be very happy if, looking from from the perspective of my country, if my country finally would join your network, because Czechia is still lacking in internet network memory, no? Remembrance, or how is it? Pamięci solidarność, how is the English, proper English title? Remembrance of solidarity, yes. That would be a very important step in this direction.
Perhaps Estonia, something different, 1999 or something else?
Well, I would say that let's say the most tragical part of the 20th century would be the signing of what we name as Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. For the rest of the world, it's Hitler-Stalin Pact or Stalin-Hitler Pact, because the same pact and its secret protocol meant that we lost our freedom for half a century. And there was pretty much nothing we could do. Maybe at the very same moment we should have fought back like the Finns did, because we have the narrative that the Finns won and held their independence. But in general, what we should learn or speak more of, I agree with Lukas, that the 1989 till 1991 is definitely significant in the history of Europe, as Europe was starting to be unified again, because even our President Meri explained to the nation in 1990s why we have to have the European values and the European democracies, that we have always belonged to the Europe, just not in between for the half a century, but now the Europe has to come to us because we have always been in the same sphere of influence and values. And I think in a way also with that era, what in Estonia we call the singing revolution, we also can emphasize the same Molotov-Ribbentrop or Stalin-Hitler Pact, how two evil empires tried to divide the world, divide Europe, and conquer basically each other as well. So we also have to, I think, continue carrying this message that those kind of atrocities cannot happen again, because they have effect on all the states or all the countries, not only the ones that are trying to be conquered or attacked with a war, because we're all in this together. We cannot move away from Earth, at least not so far. So I think we have to keep on the remembrance work and to explain the history of Europe and also the history of our own nations and the struggles to regain freedom and to keep the independence.
Thank you. And the last words from Laura?
I think if you say the two words in Finland, everybody knows what it is all about. It's Tali-Ihantala. It's two locations in the eastern border of Finland, which in spring 1944, the tough fights against Soviet Union took place, and every family in Finland has a memory of Tali-Ihantala fights, which were crucial because the Soviet Union never managed to enter Finland. And of course the losses were terrible, the result was happy. What would have happened if the Soviet aggression would have succeeded in spring 1944 in Tali-Ihantala? We don't know how Europe would look today. So that's the gratefulness to the veterans, as we say today in Finland, is based on the narrative of Tali-Ihantala. Unfortunately, no Hollywood producer, no BBC, no Deutsche Welle, nobody has been interested in Tali-Ihantala fights. It would be the story I would like to tell. And to end up with the European dimension, of course, European Song Contest. I mean, that's something we should use. The singing, the music, the culture. We saw the European Song Contest a couple of weeks ago in Malmö. It's deeply political, of course. I think it's good that it's political. We should use the political dimension, but we should rely on the cultural dimension of music combining. There is nothing else happening in Europe that puts 2 million people, or I don't know how many, 8 million people in front of the television and sense a kind of national spirit, cultural spirit, and European spirit. So why not take European Song Contest seriously? Thank you.
Thank you so much, but we apparently have another question. We have two, but I think, I'm not sure.
I wanted only to say that my second question was very practical, because it was a seeking for themes and for ideas for our projects. So thank you very much for that. And only small comment to what Milos said. Of course, we are waiting for, and not inactively waiting for, the full membership of Czech Republic in the network. Only what I can say now is that I heard that the positive decision was made on the governmental level, so we are waiting now for some diplomatic steps. I hope to can tell you in short time, hopefully in weeks, that the decision was successfully made. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing these red figures here. We have the clock here, and unfortunately, I don't think we can accommodate another question, but we will have time during lunch. So that's it. Thank you very much for the discussion. Martin Andreller, Łukasz Kamiński, Miłosz Rzeznik, Laura Kolba. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay in the room, because we are going to say thank you and to summarize and to invite you for the next symposium. It can be interesting also for you. Robert, please come with me. Laura, please stay at the stage, and I would like to invite also Heta Hedman to the stage. I swear it will be short. We are changing our identities shortly. Yes. So, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank to all of you being here in the room, and also being contacted with us through the internet. Last 4 days we spoke about commemorating and narrating freedom. We spoke about freedom as a challenge for education and public history, grand narratives, and different kinds of conceptualization of freedom, and in this context, the development of the ability to think critically and about the resonance with society, what is meaningful for the audience. We, of course, spoke about modern technologies in historical education, and modern technologies being a part of our culture and the civilization at the same time, which is very interesting connection between both those notions. Participation in the process of shaping the museum's narratives, and importance of contrasting and constructing structures of active participation by planning and functioning the museums. I hope you enjoyed this time, and now I would like to invite you to next symposium, which, as you may imagine, will be taking place in Helsinki, in Finland. We will be sending to all of you any information exact about the dates, but I would like to give the floor to representatives of our two partner institutions, Historian Without Borders, Heta Hedman, and University of Helsinki, Professor Laura Kolbe. I would like to start with Heta.
Thank you. You can hear me, right? Yes. So on behalf of Historians Without Borders, I would like to welcome you to Helsinki next summer, 2025. I will just briefly tell you a little bit about the theme. The symposium will take place on the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Magna Carta of Peace as part of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And of course, these issues will be present surely in the discussions during the symposium. And on behalf of our organization, the symposium, of course, will be very timely, as Finland will chair the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2025. And due to the chairpersonship, Historians Without Borders has launched a pilot project, which is called OSCE by All. And the aim is to elevate civil society voices in discussions of the history, as well, of course, of the future of the OSCE, as well as historical reflection on the 50 years anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act, and of course its impact on human rights and security in Europe. So just very briefly, we will of course be very happy to share the results of this project or the observations and discuss them with you in Helsinki. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Imagine we will be starting in the Finlandia Hall, in the very memory place in Helsinki, located in the center of the city, and then go to the University of Helsinki.
Yeah, thank you. I maybe go over here. Yes. And hoping to get, please, the slideshow, if you can make it. It was here, exactly, yes. So, you're most welcome next year, this time, or a little bit later, to Helsinki. Just giving you a short taste what Helsinki is all about. I presume not many hands are raised if I ask how many of you have been in Helsinki or Finland or the other cities. So, most welcome. The context is the history and the sea. Opening up, you could maybe say that Helsinki opens up towards the sea, as mentioning towards the Europe. It's part of the city's identity. And the Baltic Sea at the moment is, as you maybe have followed up or not, strategically and militarily very central in the area. Either dividing or uniting. At the moment, it's the sea of division, unfortunately. Okay, little bit about, very shortly, I know everybody's hungry, about the layers in Helsinki. And I tend to call them royal, imperial, and republican. The royal town of Helsinki, established by the Swedish king, 1550, it's not very much is visible of that. Except the fortress of Sveaborg in Swedish, Viapori or Suomenlinna in Finnish. It's of course layered a kind of northern Gibraltar, and how this fortress has been used politically and military is one of the memory places I hope we can visit next year and tell the story. The most interesting and comparable with the other capital cities in Central Europe is the face of Helsinki as being imperial provincial capital city. This, as you can recognize, is a picture of St. Petersburg. But when going on to Helsinki, you can follow up how power and authority was shaped partly in connection with the Russian Imperium during the 19th century, and how the royal wooden town was changed into imperial capital city with the presence of Russian emperors' personal interest in shaping the city center. And you can still see the old buildings in present use, the former Senate House, Prime Minister's home today. Not anymore emperor's portrait, but the president's portrait behind. You can see that how the house of General Governor is today used by the city of Helsinki. We hopefully are able to visit the city hall. I tried to push. Yes, the Imperial Palace is still the presidential palace today. So you can see the continuity, which is an essential part of Helsinki's history. No statues are torn down, no buildings are reshaped, but the functions exist there. I wonder, this is a little bit stiff. I would like to go one step back. Okay, it doesn't work. So the churches are from the 19th century up. The entertainment, the main hotel, today houses the city hall, the municipal power. The monuments are there, the imperial monuments as well, and many of the buildings are in the same use. That's most interesting to know. The development of being in a national capital city for both Finnish-speaking and Swedish-speaking Finns took place at the end of 19th century, where national institutions like theater, I mentioned the National Museum in the middle, the National Gallery of Atheneum and railway station were established as symbols of nation state. And of course, at the same time, the political movements were centered, as mentioned, around the language issue, Finnish or Swedish, the statue of Runeberg, a kind of Mickiewicz of Finland, the national poet, and of course the growing working class, Helsinki being the industrial center, created tensions. Maybe the most important Lieu de Mémoire is located here, when General Mannerheim, who was the white leader of the Civil War, donated or gave the right to power to the civil servants of the state and city. It's a deeply symbolic moment. You can see the German presence, but among others, you can see the civic society being there. In my opinion, the crucial moment, not only in Finnish, but maybe in the Northern European history. Okay, and that's how the Republican capital city developed into the seat of parliament, into the seat of central cultural, professional, and many other institutions like the parliament, still reflecting the classical spirit of Helsinki. And maybe the normalization in the post-war period started in 1952, when Helsinki became one of the Olympic cities. That's at least considered to be a very crucial moment. I hope we have a possibility to present to you the history, even the unpleasant or a kind of wrong layers of history in Helsinki, the memory places linked to the wars, the Swedish-Russian War in early 19th century, the First World War, of course, and the Civil War, and then the separate wars against Soviet Union and the Russian Revolution. They are all present in the narrative of Helsinki history. Still, you can see the division of class society, the working class area, the bourgeoisie city where the university is located in the central square, and how these foreign powers, Swedish past, Russian history, German presence, are linked into the national and local histories today. We hope to do some walks and guided tours just to show you how the layered past is present, even in the current narratives. And hopefully we have a lot of scholars, intellectuals, writers to discuss how these national and local narratives are made in the today's European context. The most interesting fact is maybe, as I tried to explain to you, that Helsinki still uses the buildings and the institutions created during the so-called imperial period. One exception is the church in Suomenlinna, which was reshaped after the independence. Otherwise, okay, the two churches, the Uspensky Cathedral and the Dome of Helsinki, might tell you the story of being located in between East and West, Uspensky being the biggest Orthodox Church in the western part of Europe. And today's modern architecture, the narrative of modernism and modernization is present. Finlandia Hall is located just annexed to the Oodi Library, which was opened up in 2017 in the 100 years of independence. So we are going to make a walk. You can see the Parliament House, symbolizing the Republican spirit of Helsinki. So, hope to see you all. Welcome and have a nice summer, and thank you for these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are counting also for a good food in Helsinki. We tested already, so it is really worth to go there.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I give the floor to Robert Kostro, who will say the last words of this symposium, I would like to thank a few of people responsible for this whole event. First, Robert Kostro and his team, especially Marta Winiarek and Michał Przeperski. And then the team of the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, and especially Maria Naimska and Aleksandra Kalinowska, who were responsible for organizing all that work. But also Joanna Orłoś, Ewelina Szpak, Magdalena Żelazowska, Monika Haber, Agnieszka Osiak, Beata Drzazga, Wojciech Pazik, Helena Link, Magdalena Ważny, Agnieszka Kucharska, Natalia Pomian, Gabor Dani, Iwona Szelewa, Marianna Sadownik, Julia Machnowska, Konrad Bielecki, Agnieszka Olczak, Barbara Welsh, and last but not least, Iga Raczyńska. Thank you very much to all of you. And now I'm passing a micro to Robert Kostro.
First, I thank Rafał for organizing this event and for this initiative. It was a great pleasure to us to host you all, and I believe that Warsaw is a good place to discuss about freedom, but also Warsaw is also a good place to live in. So I hope that many of you will come back here to Warsaw and also to our museum, especially when we have finished the exhibition above us. Thank you very much. It was great to be here with you.